One evening, I was out in Lacey, Washington, to pick up a handgun I had recently purchased for protection. Contrary to the pickup status, both online and sent to my email, the store didn't have it in stock yet and told me to come back in another week. I live about an hour away from Lacey, and at the time when I had gotten there, evening rush hour was beginning to become unbearable. I didn't want to drive all the way back home just yet, as it was an additional hour to my already long commute. Side note, the car that I was driving belonged to my dad, and I was borrowing it until I had enough money saved up for a new car after my beloved Honda broke down the previous year. I killed some time by bumming around the store I had purchased the firearm from, then decided to drive over to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai, and I walked back out to my car. I then drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill time until traffic thinned out. The car didn't need gas, so I pulled into the parking spot right at the corner of a four-way street block the gas station was on. I turned off the engine, stepped outside, and lit up a smoke, leaning against the driver's side door so as not to stink up the interior. The weather was overcast and drizzly, but not overly cold. It was now dusk, and most of the daylight had disappeared. The stoplights at the intersection were diffused by the late autumn mist. I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red as the traffic was orchestrated accordingly. Zoned out by the lights and generally being lost in thought while enjoying my coffee and smoke, I didn't notice the man walking towards me until he was already halfway across the street. He was white, average height, and strawberry blonde, maybe in his mid-20s. He definitely hadn't changed his clothes in a good while, and carried a backpack I assumed to be full of the few belongings he had. He didn't smell, but looked raggedy and unkempt. My immediate thought was that drugs were likely a part of his lifestyle. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm always cautious having grown up in the suburbs of Seattle. The man finished crossing the street, awkwardly limping towards my car, maintaining eye contact and a winced grin. I locked my car out of caution, but remained outside smoking casually. Normally, I'm not a social person, but I don't go out of my way to be unpleasant either. He approached me and stood about 10 feet away from me when he said, "Hello," and asked if I had a light. I complied hesitantly, but saw no harm meeting his simple request. Taking 2 steps forward, I lit the cigarette which he was holding out towards me while he was approaching. He attempted to make small talk, weaving in hints that he had just gotten off the bus and still needed to get down the road another block. Somewhere in his poorly crafted sob story, he stopped himself mid-sentence, like a bad actor, and pretended to be struck by an epiphany. "Hey, would you mind dropping me off down the road? It's not very far." I apologized and said I couldn't help because it was my dad's car and not my own, and I didn't feel comfortable without my father's permission. Mr. Unkempt did not like my answer, and his smile immediately turned tense and flatlined. Clearly upset, he became more insistent. "But it's just down the road. My leg is killing me, and it wouldn't even be far for you. I'll give you a cigarette." His persistence and sudden burst of hostility made my hair stand up. I firmly said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Dad car, and he has set rules." Absolutely BS. With 10 years of hospitality under my belt, I immediately offered him alternate logical ideas of what he could do to get where he needed to be. I even mentioned that maybe someone in the gas station we were outside of could help him or call him a ride. Each word I said made him increasingly irate, and he began curling his fingers into a fist, not in a threatening way, but like he was a toddler about to scream bloody murder for not getting in their way. He seemed to pause and size me up in a fleeting moment. I'm small and not very intimidating physically, so I told him I hope he makes it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in and locked myself inside. When looking up from locking the car door, I see him speed walking back across the street from the direction he originally came from. No limp, No awkward walk whatsoever. No distress or pain showing, even slightly. Just a normal speed walk of a physically well person, a rageful person. I knew I had dodged a bullet and felt pretty dumb for hanging around the city after dark alone. At this point, I didn't care about the traffic anymore, so I turned over my engine and hightailed it home in what ended up being an hour and 45-minute drive. But this time, the traffic was 100% worth the inconvenience. PSA: if you haven't heard it enough already, be careful who you give your attention to, especially when you're alone. Stay aware and always err on the side of caution, even when strangers seem harmless at first. Crazy bad acting hitchhiker guy, I hope you get the help you need rather than the help you wanted, and I hope we never meet again. I went to a wedding of my friend Courtney about 2 days ago, and I still can't shake my mind over what happened. For context, I grew up in a very religious household and went to a church every Sunday, and Courtney is probably the only person from my old church that I still keep in contact with. The situation started at reception. Courtney was super excited to see me, and was definitely the only person who felt that way, judging from all the stares from the people from my old church. I sat down at my table and started playing something on my phone when some guy sat next to me. He said that the seating chart said that he was supposed to sit at my table, and introduced himself as the groom's friend, Anthony. He was pretty cute, so I spent a lot of time talking to him, and we really hit it off. He didn't seem to judge me for being an atheist, and seemed generally interested in me. When dancing started, they started to play Brown Eyed Girl, and he offered to dance with me. We danced together for most of the night until he left to go to the bathroom, and a little later I did too. When I came out, I saw that my purse wasn't at the table, which was weird because I swore I left it there. I was tired and thought I might have just left it in my car, so I went to the parking lot and into my car to look for it, and found it on the center console. I still thought it was weird because I really thought I had brought it in, but at that point it was pretty late in the night, so I didn't think too much of it. I danced some more and noticed Anthony was gone. I asked the groom, who said that he had gone home because he wasn't feeling good. Pretty soon I felt sick too. I said bye to Courtney and went to my car. I put my keys in the ignition and looked behind me and saw something weird. It looked like something had dug down from behind my trunk. I took out my keys and looked back, and that's when I saw him. Anthony was crouched down in the trunk of my car. I started screaming and ran out, with him chasing after me. I went inside and told Courtney, who immediately told her husband, who walked me back to my car where Anthony was nowhere to be seen. Courtney's husband said he didn't see his car anywhere, so he probably left. I left and still felt sick to my stomach thinking about it. He could have easily gone home with me and killed me if I hadn't looked back. Courtney says she still feels terrible that she invited him, and that she had no idea he would do that. I haven't stepped out of my house since because I'm worried that if I go out, he'll be waiting for me like he was before. Update: the last couple days have been kinda crazy, so I haven't had a chance to look, but thank you for all your advice that I wish I would have known about earlier. Unfortunately, my address was on my ID, and as I learned now, Anthony took photos of it. Anthony and the groom aren't exactly friends, but they know each other well enough for him to be invited. After the whole fiasco, the groom tried to text Anthony about it, but got no response. Anthony showed up at my job and was lurking around the parking lot before he ran off when he saw security. He left a note on my windshield that just says, "I'm watching." Security at my job has been notified about it, so hopefully I'm safe. I was told by other people that went to the wedding that he was introducing himself as my boyfriend, and that he was planning on proposing. I'm currently trying to file a restraining order against him and feel horrified. He lives in my city and knows where I live, so I'm staying at my aunt's house as I speak. If anything else happens, I'll update. Trigger warning. I'm a 35-year-old woman, but this encounter happened when I was around 14 or 15 years old, so about 20 years ago now. But the memory is fresh and vivid, as though it happened yesterday. I hadn't even thought about the story in many years until I came across the subreddit, and after reading some of the other stories, my own personal memory of this story came flooding back. Everyone in my family, some still do, used to see this one family doctor for many years for all our medical needs. We'll call him Dr. D. We've been seeing this doctor for so long. He was even there at the delivery of my birth, where he held me in his arms when I was just a newborn baby. From then on, I would see him for everything. Every time I got sick, for all my shots, etc. So it was only natural that I would go see him the day I needed to get my first pap smear. I had just started to become sexually active for the first time with my very first boyfriend at the stage, and I had been taught in sex ed, as well as from other various sources, that once a female starts becoming sexually active, they also need to start getting the pap smear test done. For those who don't know, a pap smear, pap test, is a test or procedure done by a doctor to check for cervical cancer in women. The test is not painful in any way, but can feel a little bit strange, uncomfortable, and invasive, as it requires a swab to be inserted inside to collect the sample. Other than that, it's a very quick procedure that altogether takes no longer than a minute or two from start to finish. That last point is important to take note of for later in the story. It's important to note here that before arriving to my appointment, I was already in a state of feeling a little bit freaked out and uncomfortable with the whole situation. Because at 14, I was like most other girls my age, where I felt very awkward about my growing body, had poor self-image, would often wear baggy clothes to hide any signs of womanhood from the outside world, such as the breasts that were forming. So the idea that I had to do a test that required I strip from the waist down, sit on a bench with my legs wide open, only to have some random grown-up come right up in there and fiddle around down there, sounded to me like the last thing in the world I wanted to do, and I was already feeling very embarrassed about it. Even though I was told by many different people that if I wanted to, and if it made me feel more comfortable, I could request a female doctor to do the test, but for some reason, I had turned that option down, something that I would regret later. I guess I thought in my head, it's okay, I'll just see Dr. D like I always do. I mean, he is my doctor. I've known him for years. It's only natural I continue to see him and treat this appointment like any other appointment. I guess I had managed to convince myself to stop being so silly. Everything was fine, and besides, he is a professional doctor who will approach the situation with professionalism and will conduct himself in a way that will not make me feel any more awkward than I already do. How wrong I was. So Dr. D tells me to take off everything from the waist down, to lie on the bed and put a white sheet over my lap and wait for him while he gets everything together. I do this, feeling a bit red in the face, but I do as he asks, hurriedly, as I'm impatient to get this over and done with quickly. When he does come around the curtain, he sits down on a low stool right beside my leg, whips off the sheet and looks at me with this big smile on his face. He proceeds to have a conversation with me about, well, I don't remember what about. However, what I do remember was, it wasn't at all relevant to the situation at hand, or anything to do with the test, or any medical information in relation to me whatsoever. I just remember that he had chosen that moment to talk about trivial things like, so how's the family going? Or, what level are you doing in school now? Things of that nature. Honestly, I wouldn't have been listening to anything he was saying at the time, as all I would be thinking about is me screaming at him to hurry up and get it over with, that I did not like having a chit-chat with him while my private bits are in his face. But if I had thought for a second that this ill-timed catch-up session would be the most uncomfortable thing to happen to me in that moment, I would be wrong. As he is chit-chatting away to me, as well as going back and forth between making eye contact with me and flashing me a wide smile, to looking down to my private areas with a deep, penetrating gaze, he all of a sudden wraps his hands right around my inner thigh, closest to where my knee is. He does so just gently, almost like he's just resting his hand there for a second. But it makes me do a little jump. He doesn't seem to notice though, and continues talking. And as he's talking, I'm realizing that he slowly started circling his thumb on my inner thigh into a slow, gentle caress. Immediately, alarm bells start ringing in my head. I'm thinking to myself, what is he doing? The action was almost like he was trying to soothe or relax me in some way, sort of how a mother might use her hand to do circular motions on her crying child's back in an attempt to soothe. But why? Was I maybe being outwardly obvious about how uncomfortable I was in the situation, despite my best efforts not to show? And even if that's obvious to Dr. D, is it normal for a doctor to do the soothing action on a patient? And on top of this, how much longer was the whole damn thing gonna take anyway? I thought it was meant to be a real quick procedure. That's when deep down I started to realize that something was very wrong with the situation, or that I started to sense his intentions weren't good or appropriate at all, because he started to move his hands slowly up my inner thigh towards my private area, still caressing me with his thumb and still gazing directly at me as he went. It was when his hand reached the destination that my legs started to shake uncontrollably, not for any other reasons other than the fact that I was scared and I just couldn't help myself from shaking in fear. Then 2 seconds later, the tears started to slowly form and roll down my face as it let out a little whimpering sound. Of course, Dr. D immediately noticed this, but doesn't at all stop or spring back like you hope he would in that situation, as though he might realize that what he was doing was wrong and decides to stop what he's doing. No, he just continues to do it more intensely and says to me, "Honey, you're shaking. What's wrong? Why are you feeling so nervous? Don't be nervous, honey. Just try to relax. Everything's fine." And just continues to caress me. It's almost like he believes his words and actions are actually helping me relax, when quite clearly it's doing the complete opposite. But for some reason, I don't say a word. I don't tell him to stop or back off. I don't move a muscle other than the uncontrollable shake. What's even more baffling about my behavior and reaction at this point, I even quickly try to wipe away and hide my tears from him so he doesn't see it. Because for some reason, in that moment, I feel bad for him, because I'm worried that my tears and distress might be making his job harder in some way by me being a challenging or uncooperative patient. I can't explain why I thought or reacted this way, other than the fact that I was just a young 14-year-old girl who was freaking out and just didn't know what to do in this unsettling situation, especially because it was happening with someone I knew my entire life and had looked up to and trusted for a very long time. Anyway, it relieves me to say that he eventually did perform the test, and that the story doesn't end with any further graphic details of some sort of sexual assault or anything of that nature. He did, however, act completely oblivious to my distress throughout the whole thing. Acted the whole way through like he wasn't doing anything wrong, and that everything was normal. Oh, and remember how earlier I mentioned the test should only take 1 or 2 minutes at most to complete? I was on the table for 15 minutes with him, which might not be a long amount of time, but to me, it felt like years in that moment. Do you want to know what the worst part is? The moment I got home to my parents, I burst into tears, flung myself into their arms, and proceeded to tell my entire story. As freaked out as I was, within seconds I started feeling better, just knowing that I was back within my safety net of their presence, but also knowing that once I finished telling them what happened, that my parents would know what to do to fix the situation as well as offer me much needed comfort. But you know what? That's not what I got. What I got was being immediately thrusted out of their embrace and then straight away got the biggest telling off session of my life. They didn't believe a word I said. In fact, they got angry at me for being a troublemaker and making up stories about their trusted family doctor who they have known for years, and they knew for a fact wouldn't do anything that I was accusing him of. Then they told me to stop crying and immediately grounded me. I was in complete and utter shock, and to this day, I'm still not sure which one was worse. My doctor doing what he did, or my own family's reaction to the situation. Both experiences ended up hurting me deeply. So nothing ever came of the situation. I had to bottle it up inside and bury it all away. And he got away with it. The only thing I had in my power to do was make a decision to never see him again, which I haven't to this day. There have been many times where I had thought about reporting him to the police, especially fearing for the well-being of any other women patients in his care. But after how my parents reacted, I convinced myself the police probably wouldn't believe me either. If it came to me against him, I believed I would lose, so I stayed silent. I just truly hope that nothing awful has ever happened at his hands to anyone else after my experience.